we've talked a little bit about how the certain skills of improving a developer, but do you have any kind of like big no-nos, as in what not to do to what would make a good developer bad?
The first is gatekeeping. Don't do it. We all hate it. It's not friendly. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning, right? But gatekeeping is just a huge red flag. Like, I don't necessarily need to say much more than that. For the people who don't know what gatekeeping is, it's essentially when you're saying, oh, like you're front end, you're not a real developer, or, oh, you code in, I don't know, you're a WordPress developer, you're not a real developer. It's essentially keeping a gate, keeping people out of the I'm a developer, I'm an engineer group. Not a good thing. Pessimism is another one. So everyone's pessimistic, right? Like I struggle with this a lot. I try to only really be positive online, but the reality of it is you're not always happy. However, don't just be pessimistic. I have worked with people in the past who they never had anything positive to say. It didn't matter what the topic was. It was always negative. And that drains the energy of your team, and it makes everyone cynical, and that's just not a productive environment. So it's okay to be pessimistic. It's okay to have negative thoughts. Do those in a controlled environment where you're very intentional about it. Don't be pessimistic at all times. So really watch how you do that. And then lastly is the inability to receive constructive criticism. Everyone needs to be able to accept constructive criticism. It's not something that we enjoy hearing. But you can kind of change your mindset about it, right? Like, yes, it's not fun to hear that, I don't know, you don't get stuff done on time, and that's the reason why your sprints are slipping, right? No one wants to hear that, or like, no one wants to hear that they have trouble focusing on one task, or like they're not using their problem solving skills effectively. But this is what other people outside see of you. This is their impression of you. And so being made aware of it means you can change it. When you're unable to receive constructive criticism, you're unable to grow as a person and as a colleague. And that's where you can really stunt your growth as a developer, but just as like a human. So you should really work on being accepting of constructive criticism, but also giving it, right? It's a gift. We just need to make sure that it's a safe space to do so, and everyone's aware that it's going to be happening.
That's some really, some good advice there. I never really thought about that. The safe space with the constructive criticism. I'm incredibly self-critical. But when someone gives me a little bit of criticism, it is tough to swallow.
Yeah, it is. I remember the first time, my colleague gave me some constructive criticism, and it kind of like totally blew my mind. At first, your first instinct is to get defensive. But once you get over that, it's like, you know what? There's some truth in what they're saying. And this is kind of how I approach internet trolls for the most part, is like, well, first you get angry and you're like, well, that's totally false. That's not true at all. And then you're like, well, maybe like there's a little bit of truth in there. But when you establish a safe space and you say, hey, we're all going to give constructive criticism, this is the time and the place we're going to do it. So everyone comes into this knowing that like it's going to happen. They're mentally prepared for it. But when you catch people off guard, it's like the worst thing, especially because people handle things differently. Some people get upset, and the biggest pill I had to swallow was don't take it personally. This isn't something against you as a person. It's not saying they don't like you. It's saying they respect you enough to tell you these pitfalls so you can do something about it, right? Yeah. They're not talking about you behind your back. They're telling you these things because they genuinely respect you. Yeah.
That's so good. I mean, I've read some of your tweets, and I've seen how you've managed the old troll here and there. Hats off to you, because
it's hard. It's a fine line, because I like to educate people, but there are instances. There was one yesterday where I wouldn't say I was necessarily proud of the full way that I handled it, but this guy was berating people. He was berating them physically on their physical characteristics. He was calling them horrific names that no one should ever be called. And it got to the point where I was like, you know what? Like, people saying, dude, this is not cool. Like, you shouldn't talk to people like that. It wasn't sinking in with him. So I had to use like some kind of, humor to get through to him. Right. And it seemed like that maybe helped a little bit. But yeah, it's a hard thing to judge, because I normally would take this time to educate someone, but then there's the person, and most of the time people will be like, okay, you know what, you're right, like whatever, I respect that. Or maybe we just say, we'll go our separate ways. It's fine. We don't have to agree. But then there are people who just get super defensive, and at that point, it's really hard for me to disconnect and walk away. And I think it physically impacts me as well. So it's hard.
I can imagine that. I mean, I think I know which one you were talking about. And I was reading it and I was getting angry.
Yeah. I would not normally call someone out in such a way that I had. I wasn't disrespectful necessarily. I was putting him in the same position he was putting all of us in. And while I'm not fully proud of it, I don't agree with what the things that he was saying. You should never be nasty to someone, ever, right? You don't know what people are going through. And this is why I try not to, there have been instances where I have unintentionally bullied someone because I would maybe quote tweet something they said, not recognizing the fact that I have followers. And, as a byproduct, it could come off as other people bullying him or them or whoever it is. I would never intentionally do that. But I do think that we need to educate people, because if we just sit back and don't say anything, if we're inactive bystanders, that subconsciously tells them what they're doing is okay. And I will never sit there and say, yeah, you can call someone these names. You can tell them that, maybe they're not in the best shape of their life. No, like, that's never okay. That's not something that you ever get to say to someone. So, I just got a little fired up. But
yeah. I mean, that was outrageous. And the whole thing about social media is, it's such a difficult war zone, because you don't want to fuel it, because, but you do want to educate it.
Right.
You want it to, you want to let people know that this isn't okay. But at the same time, you don't want to give that person any more sort of like, a platform to continue. So it's a very difficult fine line.